Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are, to our virtual workshop on the institutional frameworks for managing and reporting climate loss and damage. My name is Brittany Main Rancharan. I am the Regional Network Coordinator for the Anglophone Caribbean for the CIBIT GSP, Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency Global Support Program. And I'm honored to welcome you to this dialogue on institutional arrangements for loss and damage. And I would also like to extend our sincere gratitude to the RCC Caribbean, the UNFCCC RCC Caribbean for co-hosting this session, and to each of you for being here and lending your expertise and insights. So as we know, the Caribbean nations are on the front line of climate impacts, facing intensifying hurricanes year by year, rising seas, and a widespread of economic and non-economic losses. So in response, the region is actively shaping systems that not only assess and quantify these impacts, but also inform on how loss and damage should be reflected in international reporting, like the Biennial Transparency Reports. So we hope that in today's session, we'll have a spotlight on some of the practical experiences, both from a national level and also getting a reflection from a regional dialogue, regional institutions who have expertise in this area, and how we can reinforce resilience and explore how these institutional arrangements for loss and damage can help us individually as countries. So with that being said, I'd like to share with you some brief housekeeping for this morning's session. So during this activity, your microphone will be disabled, and during presentations or interventions from speakers, please feel free to use the chat if you have questions, and we will address each of these questions after each session. And there will be, you will have access to your mics, so where you may be able to raise questions by using the raise hand function. So please do so as well. We'd love to hear from you. And when speaking, preferably please identify yourself with your name, country, or organization, so that we can get an idea of who's speaking and who's joining us. And like I mentioned briefly, the objective of this morning's virtual workshop will be to exchange good practices and lesson learned in understanding institutional arrangements and governance for managing and reporting loss and damage. And so this goes for the recently submitted Biennial Transparency Reports, which many of our countries are working on actively this year under the Enhanced Transparency Framework. And this is the outline for the agenda this morning. We have a 2-hour time cap and a very full agenda. So we will be hearing some scene setting on loss and damage, and we'll be hearing this from a WIM ESCOM member on some of the mandates concerning loss and damage reporting and the state of work on these voluntary guidelines. And then we will have a look at some of the tracking systems available. And then we'll move on into the latter half of the virtual workshop, where we'll open up a regional dialogue where we can have some experience sharing from different regional players in insurance, in data, and also on the domestic front from a country experience. After each of these sessions, we'll have space allotted for discussion and Q&A. So we look forward to hearing your questions and interventions from in response to our speakers today, and then we will wrap with a wrap promptly. With that being said, I would like to now move on to hearing a little bit more about giving some context to loss and damage. What is it about hearing some of these mandates concerning loss and damage reporting, the state of work on the voluntary guidelines. And to set the stage, we're very honored to hear from Ms. Kultum Matsomi from the WIM Executive Committee, and we would kindly invite you to join us, turn on your camera, and take the floor. So welcome, Ms. Kultum.
So, okay, now it's unmute. Thank you very much for inviting me. I will make a presentation, and I'm hoping that my colleague from the UNFCCC will share that. Thank you for your introduction. My name is Kuthum Omari Mutsumi, and I'm from Botswana and a member of the WIM ExCom representing the African constituency within the WIM ExCom. And I'll start by providing a brief overview of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, which is the WIM. And I will ask you to go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. And so the WIM itself was established over 10 years ago in 2013 to address loss and damage in developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. And the WIM has 3 functions, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar with these functions, but I'll just go over them to give you an overview for those that are not fully aware. And these functions, as you can see on my slide, are 1, enhancing knowledge and understanding of comprehensive risk management approaches to address loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. The second function is strengthening dialogue, coordination, coherence, and synergies among relevant stakeholders. And the third function, and very important function as it relates to the work that we are doing, is enhancing action and support, including finance, technology, and capacity building to address loss and damage associated with adverse effects of climate change and to enable countries to undertake action. The work of WIM is undertaken through 2 main bodies, which each have got their own institutional structure and functions. I will talk a little bit more about the WIM ExCom in my next slide, but just to touch a little bit on the Santiago network, which is on the slide, was established in 2019 to catalyze the provision of technical assistance by relevant organizations and experts to developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. Next slide, please. Actually, no, it will be on the same slide. I just want to talk a little bit about the WIM ExCom. Again, as it was established in 2013 at the same time as the WIM itself. It guides the implementation and functions of the WIM through its rolling work plan, which contains 5 thematic work streams focusing on slow onset events, non-economic losses, comprehensive risk management, human mobility, and action and supports. And these functions, these thematic work streams are supported by 5 thematic expert groups and established under each of the work streams. So there's a work stream on slow onset events, expert group on slow onset event, expert group on non-economic losses, expert group on comprehensive risk management, task force on displacement, and action and support expert group. And these expert groups have a very important function by providing technical backstopping to the WIM ExCom, by co-creating knowledge, products, and undertaking activities through their respective plans of actions to promote integrated and coherent approaches to loss and damage. I will now provide a bit more overview around the WIM ExCom's mandate, in particular related to what we are discussing today for developing the biannual transparency reports, voluntary guidelines, and the process that we have undertaken for developing these guidelines. So a bit of context of how we got here. First of all, Article 13 of the Paris Agreement established an enhanced transparency framework for action and support with built-in flexibility, which takes into account parties' different capacities and builds upon collective experience. The modalities, procedures, and guidelines, MPGs, actually operationalize the ETF, the Enhanced Transparency Framework, by setting the rules for preparing the BTR reports. And so in accordance with these MPGs, provisions for voluntary reporting of information on loss and damage are contained as part of the information related to climate change impacts and adaptation under Article 7 of the Paris Agreement. And so the types of information related to loss and damage that may be included in the BTRs are provided for in Decision 18 CMA 1, which covers the following: observed and potential climate impacts, including those related to extreme events, weather events, and slow onset events, drawing upon the best available science. It also covers activities related to averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. And it also covers institutional arrangements, which I believe is the interest as well of today's discussion, to facilitate the implementation of the activities referred to in the first 2 points that I raised. Now, in particular, what has the WIM ExCom been mandated to do? We have a specific mandate, and this mandate for developing these voluntary guidelines comes directly from Decision 1 CMA 5, paragraph 133, which was the outcome of the first global stocktake that took place in 2023. And this mandate requested a WIM ExCom to prepare, building on the work of its expert groups, as I explained earlier, that our expert group provide that technical backstopping, the technical expert group and task force voluntary guidelines for enhancing the collection and management of data and information to inform the preparation of BTRs. In addition, this work is directly related to activities 16 and 17 of the WIM ExCom second 5-year rolling work plan, which aims to compile information, identify gaps, and prepare guidance, tools, and methodologies for assessing needs related to averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage at various levels, and integrating this information into national planning and policy-making processes. The outline of the BTR guidelines was agreed by ExCom during ExCom 21 in September 2024. This was agreed following extensive inputs, including from members of the WIM ExCom, thematic expert groups, and observers. We established champions that were working on this, that are part of the WIM ExCom, as well as working with the thematic expert groups and observers. The outline was also informed by some of the lessons learned by the CGE, the consultative group of experts, on its training materials, as well as experiences from relevant activities. In terms of the process to date, next slide, please. I'll take you through what the WIM ExCom has been able to do and achieve so far with regards to this mandate, in undertaking this mandate. We used a participatory approach, including drafting of technical content informed by the expert group, working with the expert group, a planned CGE review, and some stakeholder consultation meetings and workshops, such as the one that I am participating in now, and we would really appreciate to hear some of your inputs here. And we plan to have a test phase for the voluntary guidelines. We think it's quite important to see how these guidelines, when they're tested in the and how they would respond, given that we are developing this for the first time. We convened experts from the thematic expert groups to form a core drafting group. This group is currently developing the annotated outline to what we have developed as the WIM-EXCOM. The aim is to have a draft voluntary guideline finalized by COP30 in November 2025. And so I would like to take you through the agreed outline, which you can also find it online. And I would invite you to go to the website to get the outline. The outline covers the following chapters. It has an introduction. It has a observed and potential climate change impacts. It also has activities related to averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage, institutional arrangements to facilitate the implementation of activities, good practices for collecting and managing data, and process and support for preparing the BTRs. You can see here, these are chapter 1 to chapter 6, Roman numeral 6, yeah. Among other relevant topics, the following areas are also covered by these chapters, which are action and support, slow onset events, non-economic losses. However, a key consideration of these voluntary guidelines include, importantly, building upon existing information and processes, using a range of data sources, providing examples in different ways that countries can use, report on activities, and presenting case studies as examples. As I said earlier, you can find the outline on our website. If you go to the next slide, I believe there's a QR code there that you can use, and all other relevant information. But also, because I have the platform, I would also like to share, so you can see the QR code there for the draft BTR guideline, voluntary guideline outline that I talked about. But we've also got several EXCOM knowledge products that you can use the QR code that is shared on the screen to be able to download, such as the compendium on comprehensive risk management approaches, the technical guide on sea level rise, the technical paper on non-economic losses, featuring loss of territoriality and habitability, and a technical guide on integrating human mobility and climate change, and linkages into relevant national climate change planning processes, and a case study of the projects funded by the Green Climate Fund in relation to the strategic work streams of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. We are also developing new products. Other 4 products are on the way in the pipeline, such as technical guide on averting, minimizing, and addressing non-economic losses in the context of human mobility, a technical guide on accessing finance for averting, minimizing, and addressing displacement, and a technical guide on glacial retreat and desertification. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to hand over the mic to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kultum, for the very good overview of the WIM, what exactly is the WIM-EXCOM and the mandates, and also giving an overview of the voluntary guidelines. We do have this space available for participants to reflect or to raise questions. So I'd like to also open the floor to the room to those who may have questions. So we have one. Okay, so just a reminder to be you're able to use the chat or also raise your hand. But just to give a little context, because we have the audience here is definitely the Caribbean region, and I know the work of the WIM XCOM and the different technical committees and the overall WIM executive committee. One of the mandates that was given is to develop these BTR guidelines. And you mentioned that they're voluntary. Um, could you perhaps give a bit of a reflection on your thoughts on currently how countries have been integrating loss and damage into BTRs, perhaps based on these guidelines or uh, based on their national experiences? Is this something that you'd be able to reflect on from your experience?
Thanks a lot for the question. And this will be my own personal reflections as a person from a developing country. And so the BTRs, obviously, for us to provide this kind of information, first of all, BTRs, we first developed the BTRs last year, submitted the BTRs last year, but we actually, as XCOM, we asked the Secretariat to do a very quick analysis of how countries have integrated loss and damage in the BTRs based on last year's submissions, and they're still working on that to provide an analysis of that. But we can already see that some countries have provided that, but because there isn't any guideline, it's very challenging for countries to provide that kind of information, and that's why these guidelines would be very useful to do that. From my perspective, my own individual perspective, from a developing country that I'm from, I would say some of the challenges include being able to provide these loss and damage in terms of the data that is available, that is collected, being able to assess the costs of these loss and damage is also very challenging. What kind of methodologies would to be used? What constitutes activities related to loss and damage, minimizing, averting, and addressing? That kind of guidance is extremely important. And so because of that, you tend to see that there's the information related to loss and damage varies in terms of quantity and quality from one country to another, where in some cases you have half a page of information, in other cases you have 20 pages of information because of the lack of guidelines. And so this, in my view, as a person representing a country, would be extremely useful because currently that has been quite challenging. That, in addition to methodological issues, in addition to data constraints, in addition to capacities to do that. So there's various challenges that countries are facing. But nonetheless, you see that there's actually a demand for countries to want to provide this kind of information, but perhaps because of the challenges that I shared. And again, this is my personal view, perhaps not the view of WIMEXCOM, but I thought because I was asked for my view, I could share. Yeah, so I hope that has been useful.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And definitely we do appreciate the view of also coming from another developing country. I think all these perspectives are valid. And we just from, maybe my own excerpt just from looking at the BTR submissions myself, I can understand that I can see already that there's differences in amount and availability of information available. So some countries I see are reporting, especially since this is a voluntary portion of the BTR, are reporting what they have available, and then others who may have had more extensive studies from previous years are able to report more. Uh, so thank you. Thanks very much for that reflection. And I know that some of our colleagues here are even working actively on putting together their BTRs. And so I know that this listening to some of these challenges is um, will will be beneficial to them, and also seeing that the knowledge products from the WIM Executive Committee will also be beneficial. And also noting that we will have all of these knowledge products shared and all the presentations shared for all the participants after on the webpage. So you will all have access to that. So I'd just like to say thank you again, Kutum, for your very comprehensive overview. Please, colleagues, please also feel free as we go along to address any questions or ask for links, etc., in the chat as we move along. I think this brings us to a great segue into our next topic, looking more at the data behind loss and damage, how to access the data, what tools are available. And so I think a great segue into this will be hearing from Mr. Jair Torres, Program Management Officer of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk, who will walk us through the system for tracking loss and damage across national context. So welcome, Mr. Torres, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good morning, everybody. And I would like to thank you, the colleagues of CBTI, for inviting me. And also, it's a pleasure to do these presentations after Ms. Mutoni, because there are many things that are linked about the work that UNFCCC is doing with the work that UNDRR is doing. And that goes in line with what we have been doing, in line with the synergies that are necessary between the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change Adaptation. So I'm very happy because most of the tools that she presented are integrated on what will be my presentations in a few minutes. And just let me open the presentation. And I will give me a minute. It should be coming in a few seconds. Sorry for this technical.
No problem.
We are getting there. Sorry.
In the meantime, I'm just putting a question that was posted during presentation. So perhaps for Ms. Kultu in the chat while your presentation goes on.
Well, while the presentations goes up, let me just let you know that what I will be presenting is the new disaster tracking system that it's being updated following the disinventar system that we have before. Can you see it now?
Yes. Yes, we
Okay.
can see it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brittany. Just put it presentation mode. Okay, fantastic. So what I wanted to introduce to you today is the new disaster tracking system for hazardous events and losses and damage, as Brittany has mentioned. So this system really aims to try to understand the impacts of past events in order that we can really prevent, reduce, and manage the current and future risks that we have. So we know nowadays that not only understanding the past we can foresee the future, but we know that understanding the past that can give us a lot of information in order to combining with probabilistic models, we can have a better understanding about what will be the impacts of the future. So this is what, concerning what is the past, the previous damage and losses, we are putting this system for the availability of the countries in order to have this data and insights for risk-informed actions that will allow us to actually reduce disaster risk and avoid living in the continuous cycle of emergencies responding and emergencies response, but reducing risk, notably in the context of climate change adaptations, that where we see where we have more intense hazards impacting different regions, different periodicity, different locations, and different timelines, different seasonalities. So where we come from this new disaster tracking system. So this disaster tracking system comes from what it was called the SIMVENTAR. So the SIMVENTAR was a disaster information management system that was started to be built in Colombia, but also was applied in many countries in the world. And nowadays we have more than 113 countries with national disaggregated disaster losses and damage database for more than 750,000 disaster events recorded since 1994. So recording almost since more than 30 years. And this system has allowed us to have a comprehensive disaggregated picture about the temporal, spatial, and variable data gaps that we have, but also about how disasters has been impacted. That has been the first system that has allowed us to determine, what has been the measures in order to understand how exposure and vulnerability has produced the impact that we have seen. These databases were normally hosted by national disaster risk management organizations, but sometimes has been maintained by academia, regional organizations, and in some extreme cases, but by consultants. So making that, is not becoming very national thing. The methodology was very homogeneous data model and flexible, and it was integrated since after 1994 in 2017. It was the first integrations on what we call the Sendai Desinventar in order to ensure that this tool was aligning with the targets and indicators that were proposed by the open-ending group on targets and indicators for the Sendai framework. So this is where we come. This is the Sinventar Sendai system that we are now trying to improve in order to bring new specific elements to the conversation and to support countries in damage and on tracking of disaster losses and damages. So why we do disaster losses and damage data? Because we think that first it helps us to strengthen the understanding of differentiate impacts of climate change and disasters. That help us as well for financing. Assessing losses and damage will help us, for instance, now that we have damage and losses tracking, will help us to better position ourselves and create the necessary scientific science-based evidence to reach some financial mechanisms that nowadays are there for countries to access. For instance, the the damage and losses fund, or improving the capacities technical, for instance, through the Santiago network. So it gives us the opportunity to really financing better your damage and losses in your country, and of course your disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptations capabilities in your country. Help us having good disaster loss and losses and damage data help us to risk-informed planning, so that helps to develop sectorial planning of different sectors, agricultural, tourism, infrastructure, financial, etc. So knowing how different sectors has been impacted help us to also understand what are the areas that sectorial we need to really improve our way, risk informing the way how we develop sectorial planning, but at the same time nationally how we plan for sustainable development, risk informing development in our countries. That also help us for a better disaster risk reduction and climate financing, as I mentioned before, that could be more inclusive, gender responsive, and of course effective. It helps us for informing multi-hazard early warning systems, notably in the transitions for impact-based forecasting, because like that we can determine, how previous impacts, produce this kind of damage and losses, and trying to understand how we can forecast potential future impacts when combining this information with probabilistic data and other ones. Also help us to inform resilient recovery, notably on post-disaster needs assessment. So there is a lot of symbiosis and synergies between the PDNAs or the DALAs that are created in the countries after an event and the damage and loss information. Let's say that these disaster losses and damage data and system will help to risk inform this resilience recovery, trying to understand and put in the benchmark in order to ensure that we have a better recovery. And of course, as I mentioned, benchmarking success, what was being failure, what has been good, in order to monitor progress and assessing the effectiveness. So, what is the difference between the new disaster tracking system that we are launching this year and the Inventar? The first is related concerning the governance. So, those geographic and temporal gaps on data quality and quantity that sometimes has few robust variables. Now, with the standard definitions and some of the tools, for instance, that my colleague, the previous presenter, present, will help to really ensure that these geographic and temporal gaps are closed with a better data governance that the DTS solution is proposing. It's not only a software, but it's a comprehensive solution that includes the elements of governance, that includes the elements of the of methodologies for capturing different elements, and that is important. Similarly, we had an issue before with the disinventar because every single country will have their own national definitions about what is the causal of a hazard. So we could have now in the disinventar, one of the elements is that we have a multiplicity of records to register each disaster event. So, a kind of a trouble, because when you have multiplicity of records, you cannot really ensure that the data that is informing your probabilistical models and that is informing your impact-based forecasting really is the data that you need. So now with the DTS solutions, we have a standard hazard classification that has been one of the outcomes as well of the implementation of Sendai. We have identified globally more than 302 hazards that are divided on 8 clusters. And with this standard hazard classification, we can ensure that we will have comparable data at the subnational level, at the subregional level, at the national level, and then that will allow us to try to understand in terms of regional and global advances on the way how impacts has been recorded in our countries. It also the effects that were recorded for all type of evidence, they have core variables on productive and service sectors. But the problem is that they were unstructured comments on fields. They were effects of data with not context to understand the impacts. So now with the new solution, we are expanding the sector disaggregation in order to ensure that even within sectors, we have more information that are pertinent to that sector itself and connect losses and damage with the context and baselines that you have at the sectorial levels. So that will help us for better targeting the information. One of the things that was the strength of this inventory is that normally it has been used by national disaster risk management organizations with a widely used engagement for them, a lot of institutionalizations, but there were some linkage to offline or newly digitalized field service, and also in the context of what will happen with the support on data coordination or workflows that will come, for instance, from institutes of statistics or from risk institutions like the meteorological agencies, the geological surveys, etc. So by strengthening data governance and by strengthening the data flows and coordinations, we think that the DTA solutions will facilitate a better tracking of disaster losses and damage. Also, on the human impact on mortality affected versus recorded, physical damage units recorded, the disaggregators of sex, age, income, disability were lacking. And also we have limited economic valuated damage and losses. So by now with this solution, what we want to do is to enable multiple disaggregation to capture intersectionalities. So showcasing disaggregate data value and how, some impacts has been exacerbated due to a specific sex, a specific kind of age, a specific income, or a specific disability, or the combination of all of them. And we have produced a methodological guidance for economic valuations of damage, disruptions, and losses. So that is something that goes integrated on the new tool. We didn't have thresholds on impacts of national definitions of the effects recorded. So we see that data on losses and damage require contextual analysis to understand impacts. For instance, those impacts that we can have on food security, on access to services, etc. So now we are incorporating metadata with sector disaggregation and integration of reference data. For instance, on the sector statistics with combination of data that could be available on vulnerability on exposure. So we are connecting damage and losses with baseline data about current information on the hazard, on the vulnerability, and the exposure in order to see how those impacts were really evidence in the context of the vulnerability that we have in the countries. One of the strengths also that we had before was the comparability of data, core indicators with the Inventar Sendai, and that was some good linkage and understanding change and attributions. The issue here was more on tracking slow onset and environmental and cultural dimensions. So with the new DTS solutions, we are linking two hazardous event parameters. So for the first time, this tracking system will not track only the disasters, but will track also the hazardous events. And this is a very important functionality for the tracking systems. Why? Because if you track your hazardous events that didn't trigger disaster, in a couple of years, by doing that, you can say, look, I have an impact of a specific event with this kind of intensity, but after 2 years, I have the impact of the same kind of event that didn't produce disaster. So you can, in a way, produce the evidence about the investments that national disaster risk management coordinators, that climate change adaptation coordinators are developing, and say, like, look at by the investments that we have done by improving our legislation, by improving our models, by improving this, we have ensured that similar hazards didn't create impacts and didn't create disasters. So this is one of the elements that we would like to, that we think that is very valuable on that. And similarly, we are adapting, we are doing an adaptation for Oslo onset with a PDNA approach for costing damage and losses. So we are including assessment methodologies that will be more pertinent in order to try to see the environmental and cultural dimension that we didn't have. So for instance, in the PDNA, we know that we have the cultural sector is being assessed, so we are integrating those elements here. We have also on the interoperability with risk data, we are trying to find linkage and integration of national statistical platforms. So I will show that at the end of these presentations. And of course, we will have a modular approach and scalability that will allow us to strengthen and build in on-demand analytical functionalities. This is part of the elements that we are providing with the DTS in order to ensure that, it's not only a software, but that has develop analytics and applications that will go beyond the disaster risk management and will beyond the climate change adaptations communities for different sectors that can use these analytics for risk inform their planning in each of their sectors. So what will we continue for this inventar? So the software approach is going to be an open source, customizable software that that everybody can download, and it's going to be to host it in the countries. So it's something that is for the countries, used for the countries. It will be able to have expandable data models. So there are some core variables with additional stations. So you use disaggregate data, expand preset options, and countries can really play with the tool in order to incorporate as much data they would like to have inside the system based on the capacities they can have. There is also a data migration pathways from this inventory, so we are ensuring that it's an easy transition from the information that exists already in the countries to be transitioned to the new system. And of course, the interoperability. We are also working on developing APIs towards the Sendai framework material reporting portal maintained, so that you can, by reporting on the DTS system, you are already reporting in some of the targets and indicators that, for instance, the global adaptation indicators, or now the Sendai framework indicators will provide to you. So there are something that is will be continued for the Sindentar. What will be different? So the data model will be extended. As I have mentioned, we're going to include not hazardous events. We're going to have some analyticals inside the tool as well, in order that you can see, for instance, the difference between different impacts of similar hazardous events. The open source approach is going to change a little bit in order to have contributions on code developments, and countries will have the option to customize these tools to their own. So for instance, in the case of Haiti, we are doing it under haitidata.org. That is the main platform that collects all of the disaster risk information. So we're going to incorporate the DTS within that system. So that permits that will facilitate the way how countries customize this tool. On the governance, we're going to have, of course, official database. So it's going to be government owned only. So others like academia, regional organizations, technical assistance consultants, they will have more a role of support. So it will be owned by the government, and the government will decide what will be the information that can be displayed to the public, what will be the information that will be more internal information for the governments. And we will have synchronization that will be automatic syncing of national instance, including, for instance, aggregators, regional analysis, and synchronizations with regional organizations. For instance, here is very pertinent with the GeoCRIS of CIDIMA, so with the system that CIDIMA has developed for geo-refer information on risk in the Caribbean region. So at the end, the key elements here is to have data standards, capacity development, open software, and of course the partnerships. And this tool will be as good as possible as the applications that we can use concerning this specific tool. So if as much as we use it, as much we're gonna prove and science evidence with this information, how are we using this for climate change and for disaster resilience buildings. So this is a specific way how the data ecosystem is presented. So you have the core data to be collected through the DTS. So you have on the hazardous events, so the catalogs, for instance, of meteorological informations, or the catalogs of seismic events, etc. So of the physical phenomena or all of the phenomena that you can have. And then you're going to have the combination to losses and damage. So really recording the events, the effects of events, the impact that we have on. And that will be linked with the data producers that collect these losses and damage, but as well, it will be combined with other data that is ingested to the system that will provide more context information. So elements on vulnerability, on exposure, on reference conditions, elements that can be integrated, for instance, by the statistical office. And of course, the outputs of this data model will be to create maps, dashboards, reports, statistical tables, graphs, all of the analyticals that can be used by the data users of that we can have. So the rollout approach, we will have technical assistance and support package that will start with a data ecosystem maturity assessment. So we really, when we go to countries, we are working now on a methodology to try to understand what is the level of maturity of the systems. And in the meantime, we are for providing the data migration from the disinventar to there. So if your country has already been contributing to this inventar, we're gonna integrate the data already on the DTS for your country. Or if you have your own system, we're gonna find a way to incorporate all of the informations with the applications that these systems have. Then what the countries need to do in order to get engaged on that. So first, to express interest, send us a letter, send us an email, say like, look at, we are very much interested on having the DTS system in our country. Based on that, we're gonna start launching the country maturity assessment and the country DTS rollout work plan, which I will present later. And we wanna see the mapping that is necessary for this and what mapping can be, for instance, how we can support you on mobilizing resources, maybe through the Santiago network that is there to provide support on these kind of elements, or other financial opportunities that you may have maybe in your own country, or that we can explore together with other partners of the Caribbean Development Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, or different or other mechanisms. But I'm mentioning the Santiago network because that will be the more straightforward network. What are the country DTS rollout work plan key elements? So we have 5 big blocks. The first one on assessment and diagnosis. So really, and that will allow us to understanding risk and disaster data, mapping who are the data producers and users, assessing the use case and data needs, doing the maturity assessment, and identifying maturity pathways. So which is our level, how we can improve. The second component is on institutional readiness, so ensuring that we have focal points confirmations, that we know in who in which sector and who in which national disaster risk management organization is the focal point. We're going to develop national DTS work plans, and we're going to support the countries on these mechanisms for assessment and tracking, as well as stakeholder engagement and identifying the resources requirements. So that will mean develop different protocols, memorandum of understandings, data flow change, and different mechanisms that can go on legislation to ensure that the data sharing is really ensured in the country. We're going to provide as well the technical and methodological readiness, so upgrade collection of forms, review the workflows and standard operation procedures, review losses estimation methods, do some capacities, strengthen the capacities that exist in the country, customize the guidance on the standard operation procedures, national guidance and training models to the people that will be organizing this at the national disaster management organizations, scientific institutions, but also in different sectors, strengthen the analytical capabilities, and migrating of legacy data, bien from institutes of statistics, or also from the Inventar or from other sources that you will have in your country. We will provide a technological upgrade, so a software hosting. We will discuss who will be the hosting of the software. We provide the software, capacity development, DTS branding and customization, the data integration, the customization of dashboards and analytics for your country. And we are also working now about how we can integrate artificial intelligence functionalities for the DTS system. We will do, of course, we will finalize with the institutionalization and sustainability, so ensuring partnerships for capacity strengthening at the national, regional, and global level, technical assistance for new frontiers that will show up in the coming years, guidance for decision support on priority applications, data sharing seen with global or regional DTS, so for instance, with those information that we can collect at the global level, or information that, for instance, CDMA collects at the regional level, and of course, ensuring that this is sustainable in the long term by integrating financing regular budgets, but also by integrating this tool on disaster risk management plans, on disaster risk management policies that will be developed in the country. And all of these things will have, of course, in all of the segments, a big component on capacity development and technical assistance that we will be providing to the government. So as we mentioned, so the materials will be the open source software, so that we have that I have presented, and then I will present more. I will share with all of you more additional slides on the requirements for the software or how it's integrated. We are also developing data governance and standards, so the data ecosystem maturity assessment frameworks, the data governance guidance, the hazard classification that we have and that we are revising, the hydromet hazards with the guidelines of WMO, the data readiness learning curricula, etc. We're going to integrate, and we have been developing the methodologies and framework, some of that were presented by the presenter before, on methodological compilation, like for instance on how to assess biodiversity and ecosystem services, what will be the value of those services, on damage and losses, cost and economic valuation following the PDN approach, the DALA approach, etc., and applications on the use of case of repository analysis and on compilations, live repository and technical guidance on the disaster data that we will have. Last and not least, in my 2 minutes that I have, also for us, it will be very important to for that all of the actors will be on the same picture, and we are working here now with the disaster related statistics global common framework, aiming to support that as well. National Statistical Office work hand to hand with national disaster risk management organizations and with other ones in order to ensure that all of the statistical data that is being captured by the government is integrated in the DTA. So we don't want to have multiple databases running around, but integrating those databases and ensuring that we are sharing the same kind of information. So one of the elements that we would like to encompass is the conceptual framework, ensuring that we have key definitions plus metrics, and that we really encompass information that will help us to better understand exposure, vulnerabilities, and capacities. Impact statistics that are being produced by this National Statistical Office, and disaster risk reduction expenditure accounting that go more with disaster risk reduction financing, about budget tagging, etc. So the disaster-related statistic conceptual framework is, as I mentioned, is before disaster. We can have information on hazards that normally will come from scientific institutions, as I mentioned before, like the meteorological agencies, the geological surveys, the epidemiological services of the countries, people that are capturing information on technological hazards. Before the disaster, information on exposure, so exposure of physical assets, but also exposure, social exposure in terms of instead of where are located our communities, vulnerabilities, social, economic, environmental vulnerabilities, and coping capacities that we will have. And then we will have the occurrence, and then we will see information during and after the disasters in terms of damage, losses, additional costs, assets, and flows. And this will be the conceptual framework that we would like to have beyond the DTS system that we are having. Now that is 11 o'clock, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm open for all the questions that you may have on the DTS system. Over to you, Brittany.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ayed. That was very, very comprehensive, and I think very timely and useful for everyone here in this workshop to get a better understanding of the DTS, of the open source software. Sorry, and then also noting that there is some technical assistance available, technical assistance and support package available for tailoring it to specific country needs. Thank you again. And the floor is open to those in the room. So feel free to raise your hand or to put it in the chat. Questions or comments for our colleague from UNDRR.
Hi, Brittany. Good morning, everybody. Good day, good afternoon. Thanks so much for that presentation. And I do echo the sentiments from Brittany because your presentation was very comprehensive and provided a clear overview on the work that is being done by UNDRR. My first question, because I do note you would have indicated that you are doing a lot of upgrades to the system based on the lessons learned and to incorporate a more comprehensive approach. Can you say when the new system will be fully active or operational based on the adjustments that you are making?
Yeah, thank you, Adiola, for the question. The system has been already launched. It was launched in the context of the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction last June in Geneva. So now what we are doing is now we are collecting the interest of different countries to implement this system. We are starting now in the context of the Caribbean. The first country that we are working is Haiti. So as I have mentioned in the presentation, Haiti has a system that is called haitidata.org that is being supported by the World Bank, is being hosted by the National Center for geospatial information. I was trying to translate in French in my head. So that center hosts that platform. And within that platform, we're going to plug the DTS system in order to ensure that the risk information that is on haitidata.org is part of the baseline information, knowing that also the civil protection has in work for many years on the Sinventar, so we're going to integrate the database of the Sinventar of the data of the civil protection on the DTS as well. So every single country will be case by case. Countries will say, like, look at I have my own disaster tracking system, and I think that your disaster tracking system will have more functionalities, how I can incorporate, how I can migrate what I have on the system. Knowing that at the end, this is going to be owned by the government. It's going to be, most of the information is by the government. They will have the capacities to display what they want to showcase, etc. So this is the process that we will have country by country, and this is why in a parallel, apart about the DTS, one of the elements that goes together with the implementation of the DTS is the data maturity assessment, because we want to know what is the level of data maturity in the country for disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, and based on that, start the migration of what the country has on the DTS, but at the same time providing recommendations and pathways about how this system can be strengthened, including strengthen the different methods for data capturing, data sharing, data validation, data curation, etc. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the clarification. And I think based on everything that you would have presented, it provides a useful basis and context for countries from the perspective of data, which is often a challenge. But even beyond that, the support that is available, country support available to countries. So thank you so much for the clarification. Over to you, Brittany.
Thank you. Thanks, Adiola, and thank you. Hi. I see. We have a question. Please go ahead, ID.
Hi, good morning. I was going to say Jair was ahead of me, but he took down his hand. Good morning. I'm Ida from Belize. Well, I'm one of the presenters later in the day, but I was really interested in hearing what you were presenting. Seeing that, of course, Belize is currently developing its loss and damage framework. One of the things, what the basic question I wanted to ask is how is UNBRR going to ensure that once they're working along with countries, that those institutions who work with climate change are going to be working within the context of the disaster risk management part of it, because they are not always in the same ministry. And so it's just to make sure that there is some collaboration, coordination, of course, a very close working relationship between the two. We know that a lot of discussions with disaster risk is separated from that of climate change. So it is good to see that loss and damage and climate change context is within the presentation that you made, and of course within the arrangements that's going to be within the system. So that was just my question. Thanks.
Thank you, Ide, for the $1 million question. I think that this is one of the elements that we want to promote, not only in the context of the disaster tracking system, but in the whole context of resilience. We need to understand that we need to stop working on silos, that climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction are not two separate groups. There are not two separate communities. There are hand-to-hand communities. Climate change is a driver of disaster risk, and we need to understand it in that context. But to answer your question, if you saw in the presentation, one of the key components that we have is related to data governance. So we would like to promote as much as possible, and this is what the maturity data assessment will let us know in the terms of the data governance, if this collaboration between different institutions, not only the climate change adaptations, but also different sectorial institutions is happening. Because sometimes it's not happening because in some institutions they say, look at, I cannot share the data to the other government institution because I don't have the authorization. So that means that we don't have protocols, or we don't have a standards operation procedures, or we don't have a legislation that will allow that collaboration will happen. So on the data maturity assessment, we also evaluate the data governance and how these data flows will allow and facilitate coordinations between different communities, different institutions that will support the development of these specific elements. In the context of Belize, we are working very hand-to-hand with NEMO, with Captain Mendes, and the idea, knowing that after the last reform and both of the agendas were separated, the idea is to continue the collaboration in the context not only of disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, but on elements, for instance, that are being very important in Belize, like now the implementation of the early warning for all initiative, on which one we know that damage and losses, it's a particular element for understanding disaster risk that would allow us to have better multi-hazard early warning systems and impact-based forecasting. So the answer is through data governance and through assessing what are the lacks of data governance, and by creating the necessary institutional mechanisms, institutional architecture, legislation that will be required, is how we would like to ensure that this cooperation happens between the two communities, but also beyond the two communities, as I have mentioned, for instance, with institutes of statistics. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much for that response, Heidi. I hope that response was clear, but I think the information is helpful for everyone in the room. Okay, Heidi, go ahead. You had a
just one last comment, Brittany, and to all of the colleagues. I really encourage that in your country, you contact the person that will be the responsible for the Santiago network. If there is not a focal point for the Santiago network, normally the country should nominate someone to the Santiago network. And we would like to encourage that countries apply to the Santiago network. The Santiago network is providing technical assistance for damage and losses tracking. So there is a minimum $250,000 that are available for each of the countries, which countries are not tapping now. The only country that has tapped money from the Santiago network up to now has been Vanuatu. But the Santiago network has a specific mandate to support small islands development states in the context of the Caribbean. That is all of us, in order to provide the technical support that is necessary for developing damage and losses tracking systems and a better understanding of damage and losses, either sectorial or global. So one recommendation is, like, do not lose the opportunity to tap those funds that are available for the countries. So check who is your focal point for the Santiago network. If there is not a focal point for the Santiago network, the focal point for the climate change negotiations, they should try to create this focal point, and based on that we can start developing the necessary for supporting you through funding that is available in the Santiago network, among other ones. But I say the Santiago network because it's the more straightforward that is available and that you can tap on that resources today. Over to you, Brittany.
fantastic. Thank you, and that's an excellent reminder for all our colleagues here. So you've you've heard it here from the source. So thank you very much, Shahid, for this information, for the reminders. So contact the person responsible for the Santiago network. You have support from the Santiago framework to network to support SIDS on this front. And then also, I'm sure if you have any follow-up questions for Mr. Torres from UNDRR, you can, I imagine, feel free to contact, and you will also be getting this information, the more comprehensive presentation with more details with the DTS and also the call, the technical support package. So thank you again, Jair Torres, for the comprehensive presentation, and also thank you for our colleagues in the room for being so active and asking these very pertinent questions. So at this point, I would like to take a short 2-minute break, not to break from our proceedings, but to ask you all to turn on your cameras if you're available, if you're able to, for us to do a short group photo. And then we will turn to the following half of the presentation. So if you can, turn on your cameras so we can take one virtual shot. And I realize I didn't give you all much warning at the start of the workshop, so apologies there. See you all. Okay, take a few. One more. And this is the requisite part of all our virtual activities. One last shot. Thank you. All right. Excellent, colleagues. Thanks very much for indulging us, and nice to see you all. I see some colleagues from Barbados, Belize, Antigua, Guyana. Thank you, Panama. All right. So now it is my pleasure to turn over the next half of this virtual workshop to my dear colleague, Adiola Walcott. She is the adaptation specialist attached to the UNFCCC, RCC Caribbean. And over to you, Adiola.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everybody. Can you share your screen, the presentation, Brittany? So for this part of our agenda, we will have a regional dialogue on experiences and mechanisms for loss and damage. And I believe our colleague from UNDRR really provided a great overview and set the scene and stage for this dialogue. So as part of our dialogue, we have 3 experts within the region. First, we have a country representative, which will be from Belize, and she is from the National Climate Office in Belize. And our presentation will focus on the national mechanism in Belize on the loss and damage framework. And then we also have a representative from CRIF, the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility, Ms. Jillian Kola, and she is the Chief Operations Officer. Our presentation will be more so focused on the risk insurance perspective, providing an overview of CRIF's innovative risk financing mechanism, what are some of the lessons learned, but also integration of climate change resilience into their products to minimize future loss and damage. And then we also have SEDEMA, and we have Mr. Rashid Pinder, who is a program officer for preparedness and response. And he will be providing an overview of tools and support available to collect, loss and damage data, but also what are some of the approaches to addressing challenges in assessing disaster-related loss and damage? And I think this really ties in a lot to the presentation that we just got from UNDRR. So I would like to call Mr. Rashid Pindar to commence his presentation and provide an overview on the work that is being done at SEDEMA, particularly focusing on the tools and support, but also some of those challenges to addressing and assessing disaster-related loss and damage. Over to you, Rashid.
Hey, good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Adiola. I share your sentiments on the context for this morning's webinar being set. If you can allow me to please share my screen so I can, okay, excellent, thank you. So about to share my screen with the presentation so I can take you through some of the tools that we utilize or the methodologies and the approaches as it relates to quantifying the loss and damage. One second, it will share my entire screen and not the presentation. Okay. Adiola, could you confirm you're seeing my screen?
I can see your screen, but it's currently blank. Yeah, I can see your screen clearly, so you can proceed.
Okay, excellent. So just to give a short, quick context for those of you who may not know what SEDEMA is or what we do. Now, in short, SEDEMA is basically an intergovernmental agency by the Caribbean community for the Caribbean community responsible for the coordination of comprehensive disaster management in the region. Of course, we have a number of objectives. One key of which fits into this webinar this morning is encouraging disaster loss reduction and cooperative arrangements and mechanisms. I won't go through the other objectives, but this spans across our 20 participating states. So our participating states span as far as the Bahamas in the north, as far south as Suriname and Guyana, Belize in the west, and Barbados in the east, and going up and down across the island chain. Now, so to dive straight into the meat of the matter in the interest of time, as it relates to the tools for quantifying the damage and loss. Now, before we get to the damage and loss, which is really the last stage of, well, quantifying such, which is the last stage of our DANA continuum, I wanted to quickly walk you through the first couple of stages across the DANA continuum. So DANA, sorry to abbreviate, DANA stands for damage assessment and needs analysis. So within the SEDEMA mechanism, and of course utilized across by our partners as well across the UN agency, this is the overall mechanism that we utilize to gather said data. So the DANA continuum really starts with the PIDA, which is the pre-impact data analysis. Basically, this is the capture of that baseline data, which it estimates the projected impacts, estimates what the population would need based on sphere standards and other international standards. And of course, it's subjected to verification based on further assessments after the impact. But basically, this is the pre-impact. So in blue sky times and peace times, the data that would need to be collected. And of course, this would be collected by the national authorities. Upon impact or upon impact of hazard impact, or if it has become a disaster situation, we first would have the ISO, which is the initial situation overview. This is mobilized within the first 24 hours after the all clear. Now, this provides a general overview and seeks to have a higher understanding of the impact and to start to qualitatively look at the results and creates reports for the NEOC, the National Emergency Operations Center, and a regional coordination center as well. Now, this is done in collaborative efforts by the National Emergency Operations Center and Disaster Management Structure, but it's provided regionally as well by the Rapid Needs and Assessment Team, which is a team comprised of individuals from the UN system and across the SEDEMA regional response mechanism. We then would have the initial damage and human needs assessment, which is then mobilized within the first 7 days to capture the information as it relates to food, water, shelter, and health needs at the household level to understand the comparison between the pre-impact and what has been observed, and then to compare those data together to have that quantitative results analysis, right? And then again, this is done by the Caribbean Disaster Assessment and Coordination Team in collaboration at the national level. Subsequent to this, we then have the detailed damage sectoral assessment mobilized within the first 14 days. And this assessment, this DDSA now seeks to analyze at that sectoral level, right? To have reports of the external damage and to start to provide those early estimates of costs and for costs for the early recovery. So starting at this level then to start to quantify the estimation of what are the damages, what are the loss. And again, this is done in collaborative effort by the national authorities and national counterparts with regional and international agencies. Then the last stage across the continuum, which is the stage I'll highlight for this session, is that of the PDNA, the post-disaster needs assessment, mobilized within or after those first 24 days. So right after those first 3 weeks. So it's a situation where you'd have the hazard impact, or you'd have the disaster, you'd have the all clear given, you'd have that house-to-house assessment, collecting and quantifying that data, comparing it to the pre-impact. Then you would have that detailed assessment at the sectoral level to start to quantify, okay, these are the losses, these are the damages. But then again, you know, there's those cascaded and secondary impacts after the hazards. So about 3 weeks later, then coming in to do that PDNA via the damage and loss methodologies, via human recovery needs assessment, and then to build out the recovery framework. No, the PDNA, this is usually conducted across collaboration with the national stakeholders, regional stakeholders, and international stakeholders as well, who may apply varying methodologies to get that PDNA done. Now, it has a direct link and connection to all of the other humanitarian assessments, either the ones that come before that information and the various data plugs directly in to the PDNA, or the PDNA and the outputs and the outcomes plug directly into the country's recovery needs when looking at the long term. So if you take your eyes to the screen, you can see where you have the preparedness ongoing, the disaster or hazard impacted, and then where you would have the relief efforts, preparedness ongoing, the PDNA going into the recovery framework, and then going into the recovery or building back better. Now, there are basically 5 steps, I'll say generic for lack of a better word, which would then be tailored to be country specific or disaster specific for the PDNA methodology. So the context analysis, which is looking at that baseline information of the sector prior to the crisis, which is utilizing that pre-impact data, that ISO data, the disaster effect, right? How each sector has been affected by the disaster in terms of its infrastructure, the production of goods and services, and access therein to the disaster impact, looking at from the macroeconomic level, GDP, balance of payments, expenditures, etc., and then from that human impacts, lives and livelihoods, conditions, gender and vulnerable groups, food security, social inclusion, etc. And then looking at that recovery, including BBB, build back better, disaster risk reduction, and sustainability in the recovery framework and the recovery strategy. And then that recovery strategy, really looking at the policy and the political level, looking at those policy recommendations, including the overall implementation strategy. Now, I included these next 2 slides just to give a little context on how it's differentiated between the damage and loss within the PDNA methodology and collection. And the detailed methodologies would differ per each sector that's being analyzed. So let's say you're looking at agricultural, health, or logistics and relief. the detailed methodology would differ in exactly how you quantify the damage and the loss, but the definition thereof and what you're seeking to look for remains standard more or less. So when looking at the damage, of course, this is referring to the total or partial destruction of the infrastructure, right? When costing, it's estimated at replacing or repairing such at the market value. And then, of course, it's valued in terms of the physical terms. As it relates to the loss, of course, it's looking at those economic losses, which refer to the economic flows arising from the disaster. The changes in these continue until the achievement of the full economic recovery and reconstruction. Of course, loss is expressed in the monetary value. So what are those? Let's say we're looking at health and it's looking at the additional resources and equipment, the additional medicines, etc., and how we would project this across the methodologies and across the calculations to quantify what would be the total loss across within the health sector, just to kind of give a little example to put it into context. Then when we've collated this data, when we brought all the information from across the data continuum to build the recovery framework and the recovery needs, it's a case where we're looking at from those damage estimates and from those loss estimates, looking at the value of the damage, the cost of the cost of that quality of improvement, looking at the technological modernizations, looking at build back better, operational costs. Then we're looking at the loss, looking at those cash grants to the micro enterprises, etc. Again, free access to the key services, just to sort of quantify it and put it together into the recovery needs. So again, that would be the data continuum going from the pre-impact to that post-disaster needs assessment. And I know it may have been a lot of information shared in that small space of time, but I'm hoping that you followed along as I went through the methodology. As it relates to challenges and opportunities, we know we continue to have the usual challenges or continual challenges of looking at limited baseline data, so limited pre-impact data or pre-impact assessments being conducted, limited expertise required to conduct the adequate damage assessments. As you'd note, it was about 5 different assessments coming down the continuum, and sometimes at the national level, they don't necessarily have the expertise or the continual training or knowledge transfers of those individuals who would have that capacity. And of course, the financing, not listed on this slide, but again, some major challenges is that of stakeholder engagement. In my experience across the last couple of deployments and the last couple of PBNA methodologies, when you get in the country, to have that buy-in, for lack of a better term, from the varying stakeholders that are required is not always there. And of course, the absence of new climate models and the climate data that would be required to drive the adequate and effective procedures and methodologies required. Opportunities to mitigate against this, of course, more baseline studies being conducted before the disaster, more training on the PDNA methodologies, and not necessarily only the post-disaster needs assessment methodologies to quantify that loss and damage, but then across the methodologies of the assessments which are needed to plug in, because as you would note, it's a continuum. So it goes from that pre-impact to that post-disaster needs to that recovery strategy and framework. So it can't start at the end or the middle, but across the entire continuum to have that training, and then of course education and outreach as it relates to the various different stakeholders of the disaster management structure within the countries, so that they can understand the requirements of them, so that they can understand the needs, so that should they be impacted, it's sort of a smooth transition into accessing the information and the data, or maybe just the personnel that may be needed to assist. And I will stop here in the interest of time, not to go overboard, but of course I remain open for any questions. Over.
Thank you, Rashid, for providing that very comprehensive overview on the work that is being done by SEDEMA, particularly focused on the DANA and PDNA. So we'll save all the questions that we have at the end of the 3 presentations. So if you have any question for any of our panelists, please be sure to drop it in the chat or utilize the Q&A function. I will now hand the floor to the representative from Belize, who will provide an overview of what are some of those national systems in place, but also what approach did Belize utilize in reporting loss and damage in their BTR. Over to you, ID.
Sorry, I didn't realize that I did not unmute. Good day, everyone. So what are we presenting on is looking at the loss and damage initiative here in Belize. I'll be covering what we are currently doing. So we are on our way in developing a loss and damage framework with a cost of inaction study. Just to give you an overview of how this came about. Next slide, please. So as everyone knows, and we have kept repeating this at panel discussions like these, that of course Belize is one of a country that is highly vulnerable as it relates to the impacts of climate change. And in looking at that, when we were attending COP 3 years ago, when the climate and the loss and damage fund came into play, we were excited and of course celebrating that this had come true. But in looking at that, we were also looking at what would be the needs for our country to be able to provide some kind of justification as to what is the losses and damages that would be able for us to access this type of fund. And in doing so, we sought out funding for the loss and damage framework. And this is actually being financed through UNDP's Climate Promise. And we have been very fortunate in getting support from the MRV Hub, UN MRV Hub in Panama. Next slide, please. So our loss and damage framework is looking at 3 main components: the establishment, of course, of the framework itself, an assessment of the cost of inaction across key sectors, and of course, looking at capacity building and institutional ownership. And I believe that this ties into a lot of that was said by UNDRR and also by SEDEMA, that these are, especially the capacity building and institutional ownership aspects of it is very important. Next slide. So in looking at our strategic approach in how this is going to be done, again, looking at the development of the loss and damage framework, doing that as much as when we're establishing the framework itself, we are also doing the cost of inaction study for key priority sectors. Now, the reason for the cost of inaction study is to give emphasis on the importance of actually building our resiliency and of course our sustainability in reducing the effects and impacts of climate change. And so this is working very closely and in part feeding into the loss and damage framework. In this process, we're also looking at ensuring that there is some integration into our national policies and of course our NDCs. And if you guys have any time, you can download Belize's NDCs, where we have also highlighted loss and damage approaches within that document. Looking at that, we have it also, go back one, yes, thanks. Looking at the building of institutional capacity and stakeholder engagement. So one of the approaches with this consultancy in the development of this, which is key for us, is instead of having consultants just come in country, develop the framework and leave, the approach has been a bit different. We have been highlighting the need for capacity building to our core technical team. And so the team from UN, the MRV Hub, has been coming in. We have established a technical task force, and they are going to be getting some kind of capacity development, at the same time working very closely with the sector specialists who are going to be developing our loss and damage framework. And so one of the key things, and it's good that we were able to hear about the WIM. We are trying to ensure that our framework is also in aligned with our international standards when it comes to UNFCCC, and of course, definitely the WIM aspects of it. And when looking at the terminologies that we will be developing nationally. Next slide. So we have 8 steps that we will be conducting in order to reach to the finalization of our framework and of course our cost of inaction study. At this time, we are at step 4, where we just completed a technical mission last week. So our activities started in February, doing an exploratory mission where we were talking to key sectors, mainly governmental, trying to get buy-in, having a discussion, seeing what data and information was available, especially in part when it came to the disaster risk aspect. Then from that, we unfortunately had a small gap in between February to June, in that we had elections. And so after having all of that gone through, we had a technical mission last week. But during the time from February to June, we continued having discussions with our stakeholders, collecting data and information for the team, and then having them come in last week. And that was mostly to formalize the technical task force, and having them with their specialists work specifically with the sectors that we have prioritized within this framework, and having one-on-one discussions. And so that's something that's going to be continuous for the entire process. So from that, from step 4, we're going to step 5 when it comes to the cost of inaction study. We're hoping also that within that time, that the team will be able to come back in. We want to do some community visits, especially when it comes to our most vulnerable communities, and actually looking at getting some local and traditional knowledge from those communities, especially those that are from the indigenous communities. So that is something that we're looking to do sometime in August or early September. From there, we want to do a validation and awareness on the cost of inaction study, trying to get that out there. People are aware of these things, trying to encourage more country ownership from the everyday individual to those at the government level. And then, of course, step 7, we're looking at the drafting and the finalization of the loss and damage framework in September and October, because one of the main reasons we want to finish it off in October as well is to try to see how we can then promote this when we go to COP in Brazil in November as well. Slide. So we keep talking about having collaboration and of course coordination among key parties. And so what we have been doing is identifying some of the key stakeholders that will definitely drive this framework. And so those that are here are the key ones. This does not include secondary stakeholders, and it does not include those that are going to be brought in when it comes to the social aspects, and also when it comes to the financial aspects. And that is looking at some of our NGO community that deals socially specifically with indigenous youths, gender specific, also in the Ministry of Finance, looking at the cost of those. So those are yet to come into the next aspect of it. At this time, these are the ones who are representing mainly from the task force perspective and who will be pushing towards it. If you notice, we have the Statistical Institute of Belize, the Red Cross, who plays a big role here in Belize, the National Emergency Management Organization. And that's why one of my key questions or representative from UNDRR is ensuring that they are a part of the discussion. I believe that the loss and damage framework is going to be the glue that sticks together both the disaster risk aspect and the adaptation part of it. And I think it is very integral and important to ensure that the discussion at the table has to be within both that of the organization dealing with disaster risk and those dealing with climate change. The two are definitely, it's important to have those two working together. Statistical Institute of Belize, again, like I said, was mentioned earlier, and we do have them at the table. We have our hydrology unit, hydrology unit, and the National Meteorological Service, who provides a lot of information for us, especially climate information. And of course, we have our key sectors who are our more important income earners, I would say, that if there was a huge impact or a huge disaster coming in, these would be the key sectors that would definitely affect us economically and socially. And so one of the things I wanted to highlight in this is that two things. One is that we have been trying to push, we are going to be using the PDNA methodology, or we are using the PDNA methodology for this. We are also trying to ensure that we look at the economical aspects of it, trying to get information as it relates to costs post-disaster, but also looking at what would be the effects and the costs on the ground for the everyday person. So for small businesses, how does this impact them? How does the damage to a road would impact businesses, getting back in play and getting back to some type of normalcy? How do these things? So we're looking at all these areas. Again, as everybody has mentioned, also data and an information system is key. So what we're trying to do is, in looking at the institutional framework for this loss and damage, we want to work very closely with NEMO. At this time in Belize, NEMO is updating their data structure. And so we want to look at how the data structure, instead of duplicating efforts, because they're the same, the organizations that sit on Dana are mostly the same organizations that we've been speaking to. So we want to see how we can fit in the structures of Dana to work and correlate a lot with the loss and damage. So we're going to be discussing that and seeing where those gaps are, seeing how we can fit those in. When it comes to the capacity aspects of it, what it is that we would want to do once the framework is done is exactly as mentioned again by our UNDRR representative, is then going to Santiago Network and submitting a concept, especially as it relates to capacity building, not only at the government level, but at community level. I'm very fortunate to be the liaison officer for Santiago Network and the lead negotiator for Santiago Network and even loss and damage at the COP. So for us to be able at the National Climate Change Office to be able to get and build awareness on this is something that we will definitely be promoting once, especially in the coming months with the framework as one of the basis for trying to get support to our communities and support for government as well. So just wanted to highlight where the process has been, what it is our intentions are, and what we're looking at in the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Your presentation was extremely detailed. And one of the things that came out of your presentation was evident synergies and alignment with national, but also international processes. And one of the critical things that I saw that you brought out as well, based on what is being done in Belize, is the importance of having a country-driven process, but also have buy-in and capacity building. We'll now move to the presentation from Griff, and please ensure if you have any questions to drop it in the chat while we receive our last presentation, which will be done by the CRIF representative.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. And again, I thought this particular section of the agenda was really well put together. It's a really natural flow from SEDIMA to the country level to, again, what CRIF does. So I'm going to try to keep this on key points. So first of all, I am hoping that several persons in the audience are a little bit aware of CRIF. And just to remind you that CRIF started operations after the passage of Hurricane Ivan in 2004. And at that time, we were offering earthquake and tropical cyclone policy, a parametric insurance policy to really, support countries in taking ownership and mitigating their own risk. CRIF was supported initially, and to an extent, largely still by donors, but it was really for the region to more proactively plan against, the loss and damage that was apparent at that time, and even more so now with the advent and, of course, in the throes, I should say, of climate change. So 20 years after, we see ourselves as a development insurer, and that means in addition to providing a broader range of disaster risk financing products, we do offer services that really are focused on building resilience and advancing the sustainable development agenda. And in terms of this aspect of our vision, it really is within strong collaboration with stakeholders, many of whom are in this audience today. So again, our insurance coverage, it's based on models, it's parametric insurance. Payouts are made within 14 days of an event. As a part of our mandate, we are here to close the protection gap and to ensure that insurance is definitely available to a wider sector, wider range of companies. And we have gone not well from the sovereign level, but again, moving into specific niche sectors, targeting, other sectors as well, such as fisheries, electric utilities, water utilities as well. So our products initially, as I mentioned, were really based on tropical cyclone and earthquake, right? One of the themes in this session is really how do you manage loss and damage on a wider scale? So we would have been over the years, definitely learning lessons from instances where the model itself or the models would not have been totally customized to the nature of some of the events that we have seen in the last 5-7 years. And over that period of time, we have been making improvements, and I should say, not just improvements, but really adding on features to products that cater for, specific types of events. So, for example, we would not have initially modeled an event like Dorian that would have sat on top of a country for days on end. After Dorian over Bahamas, we were able to better model an event like that. And of course, that reduces what we know as basis risk, meaning the inherent risk where a modeled results may be resulting in a payout that is actually higher than the damage on the ground or lower, right? Other innovations really have been made throughout the years. For example, we would have seen with climate change more frequent events, and maybe individually, we are not able to generate a payout based on one, but after you have a high level of saturation after multiple events, there is now a feature that caters for that type of loss and damage after to numerous events. So I just really wanted to illustrate that as some examples of innovation and improvements in response to climate change. But in terms of CRIF, it really is still, I mean, the business model is around risk pooling. So we have maintained the CARICOM pool, and we have grown it similarly for Central America. And it's really when countries come together and you have that risk pool, the pricing becomes a little more affordable for countries. So moving forward just a little bit, again, to clarify for those who are not familiar, parametric insurance is when you basically insure a specific risk, for example, tropical cyclone, rainfall, flooding, and it's based on a model calculation of losses given the intensity of an event. So simply put, if you had a 6.3 earthquake over a particular region where your assets are defined in a particular way, with a particular value, you estimate based on that what the payout should be for that level of intensity. And it is very similar when you have certain types of storms, different categories of storms or periods of rainfall that you can, based on the assets on the ground and the economic exposure, estimate a payout. And in terms of insurance as a tool, I mean, just to highlight on the right side of the slide, CRIF, and I should say countries, our policy holders, typically would use insurance to cover loss and damage related to those low probability events but high severity events, because that's what really enables you to plan from a risk management point of view. How do you fund those losses post disaster? Of course, I mean, it differs between country risk profiles, it differs between perils, and you would see countries wanting or opting to insure at a particular level, even for those medium type of severity events that may be a little more frequent. And you see that more and more as countries are preparing for rainfall and tropical cyclones in particular. I wanted to emphasize the point that CRIF's payouts are typically or used for that recovery phase. So if you look at the graphic on the right, government funds may be used for some of those smaller types of events, if you had flash flooding, etc. But once you have, the storms and the earthquakes, and these, periods of heavy rainfalls, typically payouts are used for that immediate recovery, right? And that's what we actually call as the liquidity gap, because you may have funding in place, whether it's a CAT DDO or contingency line of credit, or you may borrow as a nation to finance some of those long-term infrastructure needs. It is really the need for immediate funds post-disaster that countries really use CRIF's payouts for. And again, coming back to the theme, it really is about, again, that level of innovation. So for example, in terms of even improving our products and payouts and reducing basis risk, one of the things that we're looking at now would be, what's known as the asymmetry factor around storms, that one side of a cyclone may be actually stronger than the other. And this is perhaps typical, but it's something that has to be modeled. And that actually was the case for Beryl as well. So, I guess it's when you see these really unique features associated with these disasters, we're able to go back and model it and include those as part of the the modeling for the product, and essentially that gives you a better product. So just quickly, stating that countries typically, as we said, use these payouts for post-event recoveries. We have seen instances where it's dedicated, the payouts may be dedicated to recovery of the agricultural sector, or repairs of an airport, or actually funding the cost of emergency staff to go out and assist persons. A few themes, that have emerged. Typically, we don't have restrictions around payouts. However, over the years, given the environment that we live in, there is a lot more accountability for payouts and reporting around the use of payouts, because to the extent that CRIF brings in donors funds, we also have to report to donors in terms of how these payouts were used, what was the impact, what was the impact on gender, how many people benefited. And these really, it would be really close in terms of how we measure our own effectiveness as a company. It's not just about the liquidity gap and the protection gap, but themes about equity, use of payouts, supporting resilience and building back better. It's really the type of conversation and partnership we are having with stakeholders and our policyholders. So in the interest of time, I just wanted to make one key point, that parametric insurance is really a game changer. It's an instrument where you can match potential payouts to loss and damage related to a particular economic exposure. So whether it is sector-based or it is response-based, for example, utilities where you need, the wheels don't get turning unless water is up and running, electricity is up and running, that you're able to actually move, payouts just at the sovereign level, but really targeted to particular sectors. And also, again, to say that insurance payouts, when they're targeted, could really make social protection systems more shock responsive. And again, you do see the impact it has on lives and livelihoods post disaster. So I am going to stop here and happy to take questions as they arise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gillian, for that very comprehensive presentation and providing a lot of clarity on the products and services being offered by CRIF, but also providing a clarity on the scope of parametric insurance, the models, and also innovation that is incorporated in the insurance being provided by CRIF. We will now open the floor for questions for our three panelists. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand, or you can place the question in the chat for our three panelists. While we wait for questions, I'll start with Sedima. One of my question is more so geared towards data. I know that Sedima over the years would have been utilizing what you call the Caribbean Risk Information System. Can you provide us with an update in terms of the status of that, but well, if it is active, and also in that regard, can you provide us with an overview of the aim of the information system? Rashid?
Hey, Adiola, my apologies. I only caught the last part of your question. Sorry, could you repeat, please?
No problem. I was clarifying whether or not the Caribbean Risk Information System developed by Sedima is still active? And if it is, can you provide an overview of the information system?
Yes, the CRIS is still active. I could provide a short overview of the system, as that's not necessarily my area of expertise. But the CRIS system is basically our virtual platform where where internally we would analyze a lot of the pre-impact data. So where we would ideally have a lot of our pre-impact data, we'd have a lot of our GIS data, a lot of our mapping as it relates to hazard risk, hazard impact, as it relates to projections, and what that may or may not look like for our countries in terms of baseline. And then, of course, if when threatened or impacted, it is still active. Before what I can do, I could obtain the link to get to it directly, and I can share it with you so that you can share it on the platform if needs be.
No problem, no problem. Thank you so much, Rashid. Please be sure if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or drop it in the chat. I also have a question for ID from Belize, and it is more so focused on your BTR, because I do take note of the mechanisms and the systems that you're putting in place and the comprehensive implementation plan that you have, all of which will provide support for future reporting. So can you provide us, if you can, with some of the challenges that police experience in reporting loss and damage in your BTR?
Hi, sure, definitely. Okay, so for the first BTR that we submitted in December, um, in all honesty, the data has been very limited. It was not something we had planned to do because of that. And that was one of the reasons we have it more uh, towards the BTR2, which is going to be in 2027. The the one of the key areas that we're trying to strengthen so that we're able to report it in the BTR2 and of course our fifth NC is going to be what comes out from the framework itself. So a lot of the data and a lot of the information that will be coming out from the framework will definitely be able to be submitted and reported within the BTR2 in 2027. One of the key issues that we've been having is, and I guess most of our Caribbean countries are basically going through the same, where there's no one place or one repository that has all this information. And if you do look at the information, it's not all the way to like 10, 20, 15 years ago. And there's been changes when it comes to personnel within these institutions as well. So um, having said that, we are within the framework itself, we're looking at what are the gaps, what are the areas that will need to strengthen this within the disaster management aspects of it, of course, and how that feels into the loss and damage and the adaptation reporting. So it's strengthening that part moving forward because of what we found out would have been the falling point or the areas of gaps identified when we were trying to see if it was going to be something possible within the BTR submission in December. I hope that answered your question.
It does actually provide a lot of clarity and question. And just a follow-up question to that. I know Belize is still in the process of developing your framework, but at this stage, do you have any lessons learned? Because I know oftentimes with developing a national framework, it's sometimes a learning by doing process, and you can have lessons learned initially, but also you can have lessons learned at the end of the process. So given where Belize is at the moment, is there any lessons learned that you can share with countries, particularly participating countries looking to develop their own national mechanism for loss and damage?
Yes, I believe one of the key things that we could have done a little bit differently was having the more robust discussion when it came to NEMO, who deals with the disaster risk management aspects of it. I believe if we, again, it goes back to data and information. So it's looking at trying to get all the sectors within the data who might or would have data information that at least can start some level of analysis for the framework. And that is something that was the most challenging at the beginning in identifying some of the stakeholders who are there. And it had to do a lot with a change in management. And again, I had mentioned we had elections this year, so there was a move in where they were housed. And so having a lot of these things from the beginning in developing even the terms of reference in actually planning out what was going to be done, I believe having them in the discussion from then would still have been something a little bit more positive and would strengthen it a little bit. Not saying that it's not the relationship is not there now, it is, but it would still have been a little bit easier had it been from the development of the terms of reference.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I don't see any questions in the chat or any raised hand. So my last question will be, oh, sorry, I see there's a question. Oh, there is a comment in the chat stating that I think a great lesson for Belize is also that we are a springboard from the PDNA experience as well. Thank you for that feedback. I have one last question, and this question is for Griff, and then we will go to the latter part, which will conclude our session for today. So my question for Griff will be more so, can you provide us with a brief overview of the Griff micro insurance facility? Because I know it's something that was recently launched with Cellulose Pro. So if you could provide us with a brief overview on that insurance facility.
So thank you very much for that question. And yes, you are quite right that we have partnered with Celsius Pro to really ramp out and scale up the delivery of this product. Now, first of all, so I really do have to acknowledge the German government because they were the initial donor that really supported the development of a product that was very much tailored and geared and priced for the micro sector in particular. And a product would have been developed, it would have been tested or piloted in 3 countries. But since then, I mean, what I would want to say is that CRIF is not a direct distributor of the product. So CRIF is not actually offering the product. We are facilitating the delivery of it through insurers, regional insurers. So there is one relationship that is being redefined and forged. A regional insurer will actually add this onto their suite of products. So their agents are going out there and promoting this product for the sector. But in the meanwhile, it really is strongly endorsed by governments, by donors, and CRIF is really the implementing agency that is there to ensure that this product is technically sound, that it is priced and matches the needs, and it is delivered 14 days after an event so that a certain level of cash goes into the hands of persons that are very often, the ones that have to recover first and foremost to support their families, to support their communities after an event. I mean, I always remember the case of Hurricane Ivan. And days after that event, I mean, the type of entrepreneurship that you see and the survival of individuals after an event like that, it's really remarkable, and insurance is one product that is going to help them to be a little more resilient. So what I would say is, for more details on that, we do have a dedicated team of persons that are working on scaling up that initiative. There is some information on the website, but definitely for more details, please reach out to us and we will put you in touch with the right persons if you are interested in partnering, or if you are just interested in promoting or getting more information. So thanks very much, Adiola, for that question.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Colleagues, we are now wrapping up our regional dialogue. Which essentially provided an overview. We had the perspective from Belize, which and ID really presented a great overview of Belize's framework for loss and damage and some of the critical processes, but also highlighting some of the challenges and lessons learned that they can share with other countries. And then we also had the presentation from SEDEMA, and SEDEMA provided an overview of the support that they provide to countries and the process, particularly Ghana and PDNA. And also lastly, we had a great presentation by Jillian from the CRIF, Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility, on their parametric insurance and also the scope and as well as innovation being incorporated. So in summary, we saw approaches, challenges, but also some of the solutions emerging based on what the countries are doing. Well, country in this case, Belize, but also organization within the region. We will be concluding our session within the next 5 minutes. I will now hand the floor over to Brittany, who will facilitate a short Mentimeter.
Thank
So
you.
over to you, Brittany.
Thanks so much, Adiola, and thank you to our excellent speakers from the regional dialogue. I have shared a link in the chat with a link to Mentimeter to do a short three question survey to help us have some feedback, hear your thoughts on this session, and also to help us improve for our subsequent sessions. And I also have it here on the screen too. You can scan this QR code, or you can join at the website, or click the link that I sent in the chat to enter. I see we have a few people in, so kindly asking for a few others to join. The first question is, what was the most useful part of the virtual workshop done today? And for those who just popped back in, you can scan or follow the link. UNDRR's presentation on the data tracking system. Very helpful, very practical. Seeing different tools to quantify loss and damage, as well as the experience shared by Belize. Updates on Desinventar, okay. Some of us we're familiar with the different data tracking system tools that are available. Very good. And I know some of you are entering it right now as well. So thank you very much for your responses. This will also be open for the next 2 days to add at your speed. And then moving on to the second question, kindly give us a reading on your satisfaction with today's virtual workshop. Very comprehensive, covering a range of topics, and so including the regional dialogue. Thank you very much. Adding as more participants are joining the link. And then the last question, is there anything you wish we talked about more? Anything else that you would like to know more about or that left you wanting more information about? More country experiences. Can work on getting more country experiences for our future workshops, practical examples, perhaps from other countries apart outside of this region as well, risk knowledge, governance, more information on approaches, non-economic losses. Okay, we didn't quite cover that. Get to details. Okay. Very good, colleagues. Thank you very much for your input. We'll definitely take these into consideration, and we may develop further content and further sessions, diving deeper into some of these specific areas. Then lastly, there's an open space if you have any questions from the audience, and you can ask now, or you can use this same link and ask at a later time. We will be looking at these questions and also addressing them with the different speakers and with the different experts. If there are any questions that you additionally that you had, even after this virtual workshop. So with that, let me stop sharing. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your participation in this last evaluation. I will just hand it right back over to Adiola to give us our closing.
Thank
you very
you,
much.
Brittany. Dear colleagues, partners, and friends, I am really happy that we are at this stage. I think we had a very great session, and I am pleased to deliver the closing remarks on behalf of the interim lead for RCC Caribbean and Global RCC lead, Andrea Campanogara. So as we conclude our session today, which outlines the need for national mechanism, tools, and data, including finances, we see that this session provided fundamental information as well as best practices that countries can incorporate into their national processes, including reporting loss and damage in their BTR. It is very evident that loss and damage is the lived reality in many states, regions, including the Caribbean small island developing states. These critical discussions that we had today are linked to the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, which promotes the implementation of approaches to address loss and damage associated with climate change impacts in a comprehensive, integrated, and coherent manner. This mechanism, established under the convention, is to assist developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. I believe that this workshop has sharpened our tools, strengthened our networks, and renewed our resolve. So we have this opportunity to not just leave informed, but also activated. Last but not least, I would like to express gratitude, and let me express gratitude to Ms. Monsami from the WIM XCOM, who provided a scene setting on the voluntary guidelines, but also an overview of loss and damage under the UNFCCC, Brittany, and CBIT GSP. We also had Mr. Torres, UNEP, Jeff, as well as Belize, CRIF, SEDIMA, all of which played a very critical and leading role in contributing to the organization of this workshop. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And like Brittany mentioned, the Mentimeter will still be open for a couple of days for your input.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adiola, and thank you, colleagues, again. Follow the chat. We have information. We'll have information for all our speakers, for DTS, for all of the other, from all of the other agencies, and we'll be following this after with an email And as well, you can follow the event site on the Climate Transparency platform, where you will find all of the presentations, information regarding today's session, as well as the recording once it's available. Thank you again, and wishing you all a great rest of your day.
Yeah, everybody. Take care.
Here.